Chapter 1. The Artifact. The alarms blared through the halls of the Galactic Alliance research station orbiting the remote planet of Zephyrus Prime. Dr. Ethan Riker sprinted towards the laboratories, his heart pounding in his chest. "What's the situation?" Ethan demanded as he burst into the lab, his eyes immediately drawn to the pulsing Prothean artifact at the center of the room. "The artifact's energy readings are off the charts," replied Vara, the Xar'Kog engineer, her voice tight with tension. "It's emitting some kind of signal, but we can't decipher it." Ethan moved closer to the artifact, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Have we tried running it through the quantum decryption algorithms?" "Yes, but it's like nothing we've ever seen before," said Mara, the human pilot, who was frantically typing on a nearby console. "It's almost as if the artifact is alive, adapting to our every attempt to understand it." Suddenly, the artifact pulsed with a blinding light, and a shockwave rippled through the lab, knocking them off their feet. Ethan struggled to his knees, his ears ringing, as he looked up at the artifact in awe and fear. "Vara, Mara, are you all right?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I'm fine," Vara groaned, pulling herself up. "But the artifact... Look!" Ethan turned back to the artifact, his eyes widening as he saw the glowing symbols that had appeared on its surface. They seemed to dance and shift before his eyes, forming patterns that tugged at the edges of his understanding. "What does it mean?" Mara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his mind racing with possibilities. "But I have a feeling that it's important. We need to decipher this message, whatever it takes." As Ethan and his team set to work, unaware that hidden eyes were watching their every move. In the shadows, the rogue Xar'Kog faction leader smiled, his plans already in motion. The Prothean legacy would soon be his, and with it, the power to control the galaxy. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he delved deeper into the mystery of the artifact. He knew that he was racing against time and an unknown enemy, but he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. He thought of his grandmother, Captain Lena Riker, and the legacy she had left behind. Ethan had always been proud of her accomplishments, but he had never felt the same call to heroism that had driven her. Now, facing the greatest challenge of his life, he began to understand what it meant to be a leader, to have the fate of the galaxy resting on his choices and actions. As Ethan worked, he could feel a change within himself, a growing sense of purpose and determination. He knew that he might not have all the answers yet, but he would stop at nothing to protect the galaxy and uncover the secrets of the Prothean legacy. With renewed resolve, Ethan turned back to the artifact, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The adventure had only just begun, and he was ready to see it through to the end. Chapter 2. The Signal. The lab was a flurry of activity as Ethan and his team worked tirelessly to decipher the mysterious symbols on the Prothean artifact. Hours turned into days, but despite their best efforts, the meaning of the message remained elusive. "This is impossible," Mara groaned, rubbing her tired eyes. "We've tried every decryption method known to the Alliance, and still nothing." "We can't give up now," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "There has to be something we're missing, some key to unlocking this puzzle." Vera looked up from her console, her eyes widening with sudden realization. "What if we're approaching this all wrong?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if the message isn't meant to be decrypted, but rather understood?" Ethan and Mara exchanged a glance, their minds racing with the implications of Vara's words. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. "Think about it," Vara continued, her excitement growing. "The Protheans were an advanced civilization, far beyond anything we've ever encountered. What if this artifact isn't just a message, but an interface, a way for us to communicate with their technology?" Ethan felt a thrill of excitement run through him as he considered Vara's theory. "It's worth a try," he said, already moving towards the artifact. "Vara, Can you modify our scanners to search for any kind of neural or telepathic interface? On it, Vara replied, her fingers flying over her console. As Vara worked, Mara pulled Ethan aside, her face etched with concern. Ethan, are you sure about this? She asked, her voice low. We don't know anything about this technology. It could be dangerous. Ethan met Mara's gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. I know, he said softly, but we don't have a choice. If we don't figure out what this artifact is trying to tell us, we may never know what we're up against. Mara nodded, understanding the weight of Ethan's words. I'm with you, she said, squeezing his hand. No matter what happens. Just then, Vera let out a triumphant shout. I've got something, she exclaimed, her eyes glued to her console. The artifact is emitting some kind of neural signal, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. Ethan and Mara rushed over to Vara's console, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Can we interface with it? Ethan asked, his voice tight. I think so, Vera replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. But it's going to require a direct neural link. It could be risky. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady. As Vera prepared the neural interface, Ethan could feel the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He knew that he was taking a huge risk, but he also knew that the fate of the galaxy could depend on what they discovered. With a deep breath, Ethan stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the neural interface connected with his mind, he felt a rush of energy course through him, unlike anything he had ever experienced before. And then, in a flash of blinding light, Ethan found himself transported to another realm, a place beyond space and time. He knew that he was on the cusp of a revelation that could change everything, but he also knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. As Ethan stood on the precipice of the unknown, he could feel a newfound strength and resilience rising within him. He knew that he was no longer just a scientist, but a pioneer, a leader, and a hero. And with that knowledge, he stepped forward, ready to embrace his destiny and uncover the secrets of the Prothean legacy. Chapter 3. The Vision. Ethan found himself standing in a vast, ethereal space, surrounded by swirling galaxies and shimmering stars. He looked down at his hands, marveling at the translucent quality of his own body, as if he were a ghost in this strange, otherworldly realm. Where am I? He wondered aloud, his voice echoing in the endless expanse. Suddenly, a figure materialized before him, tall and imposing, with eyes that glowed with an ancient wisdom. Ethan instinctively knew that he was in the presence of a Prothean, a being from a civilization long extinct. Welcome, Ethan Riker, the Prothean spoke, its voice resonating through Ethan's mind. We have been waiting for you. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, a mix of awe and trepidation. Waiting for me? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Why? The Prothean regarded Ethan with a deep, penetrating gaze. You are the key, Ethan, it said, its words heavy with meaning. The key to unlocking the secrets of our legacy and to saving your galaxy from the darkness that threatens to consume it. Ethan's mind reeled with the implications of the Prothean's words. What darkness? He asked, his heart pounding in his chest. What are you talking about? The Prothean waved its hand, and suddenly, Ethan was engulfed in a vision of the future, a future where the galaxy was in ruins, consumed by war and chaos. He saw great cities reduced to rubble, planets scorched by the fires of conflict, and countless lives lost in the struggle for power. And at the center of it all, Ethan saw the rogue Xar'Kog faction, led by a figure cloaked in shadow, wielding the power of the Prothean artifact to bend the galaxy to their will. This is what will come to pass if the artifact falls into the wrong hands, the Prothean warned, its voice heavy with urgency. Only you, Ethan Riker, have the power to stop it. Ethan felt the weight of the Prothean's words settling on his shoulders, a burden he wasn't sure he was ready to bear. "But how?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a scientist, not a hero." The Prothean smiled, a knowing, enigmatic smile. "You are more than you know, Ethan," it said, its voice filled with encouragement. "You have the courage, the wisdom, and the strength to lead your people to a brighter future. You need only believe in yourself." With those words, the Prothean began to fade, and Ethan felt himself being pulled back to his own reality. "Wait!" he called out, desperate for more answers. "What do I do now?" But the Prothean was gone, and Ethan found himself back in the lab, surrounded by the concerned faces of his team. "Ethan!" Mara exclaimed, rushing to his side. "Are you all right? What happened?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "I saw everything," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "The Protheans, the artifact, the future. It's all connected." Vara and Mara exchanged a worried glance, but Ethan pressed on, his voice growing stronger with each word. "We have to stop the rogue faction, no matter what it takes. The fate of the galaxy depends on it." As Ethan spoke, he could feel a newfound sense of purpose and determination rising within him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew that he was no longer alone. He had his team, his friends, and the wisdom of the Protheans to guide him. And with that knowledge, Ethan set his jaw and turned to face the future, ready to embrace his destiny and become the hero the galaxy needed him to be. Chapter 4. The Rogue. Deep within the shadows of a secret base, the leader of the rogue Xar'Kog faction sat brooding, his eyes fixed on the holographic display before him. The image of the Prothean artifact rotated slowly, its pulsing energy casting an eerie glow across the darkened room. "Report!" the leader barked, his voice cold and commanding. A subordinate stepped forward, his head bowed in deference. "Our spies have confirmed that the artifact is in the possession of the Galactic Alliance," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "They are studying it at a research station orbiting Zephyrus Prime." The leader's eyes narrowed, a calculating gleam in their depths. "And what of this Ethan Riker?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. The subordinate hesitated, swallowing nervously. "He appears to be the lead scientist on the project," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "Our sources indicate that he may have made a breakthrough in understanding the artifact's true nature." The leader leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him. "Interesting," he mused, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps this Riker could be of use to us after all." Rising to his feet, the leader turned to face his subordinate, his eyes blazing with a fanatical intensity. "Prepare our forces," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "We will take the artifact, and Riker, by any means necessary." As the subordinate scurried away to carry out his orders, the leader turned back to the holographic display, his gaze fixed on the slowly rotating artifact. "Soon," he whispered, his voice filled with a dark, malevolent hunger. "Soon, the power of the Protheans will be mine, and the galaxy will tremble before me." Meanwhile, back at the research station, Ethan and his team worked feverishly to unravel the secrets of the artifact. Ethan pored over the data they had collected, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to make sense of the complex algorithms and equations. "There's something here," he muttered, his eyes darting across the screen. "Something we're missing, some key to unlocking the artifact's true potential." Vara looked up from her own work, her eyes wide with excitement. "I think I might have found something," she said, her voice trembling with anticipation. a hidden subroutine in the artifact's programming, something that could be a backdoor into its core functions. Ethan rushed over to Vara's console, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. "Can we access it?" he asked, his voice tight with tension. Vara nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "I think so," she replied, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "But it's heavily encrypted. It could take days, even weeks, to crack the code." Ethan felt a sense of desperation rising within him, a feeling that time was running out. "We don't have that kind of time," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "The vision the Protheans showed me, it's coming true. We have to act now, before it's too late." Mara stepped forward, her hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. "We're with you, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with a fierce determination. "No matter what it takes, we'll find a way to stop the rogue faction and protect the galaxy." Ethan nodded, drawing strength from his friend's support. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with danger and uncertainty, but he also knew that he was no longer the same person he had been when this all began. He had grown, evolved, become something more than just a scientist or a researcher. He was a leader now, a hero, and he would stop at nothing to fulfill his destiny and save the galaxy from the darkness that threatened to consume it. As Ethan turned back to the artifact, his eyes blazing with a newfound resolve, he knew that the final showdown was fast approaching, and he would be ready, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Sacrifice. The alarms blared throughout the research station, red lights flashing in warning as the facility shuddered under the force of the attack. Ethan, Vara, and Mara raced through the corridors, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. "They're here," Mara panted, her eyes wide with terror. "The rogue faction, they've found us!" Ethan gritted his teeth, his hand tightening around the Prothean artifact. "We can't let them get the artifact," he said, his voice filled with a steely resolve. "No matter what happens, we have to keep it out of their hands." Vara nodded, her face set with grim determination. "I'll try to hold them off," she said, her hand reaching for her weapon. "You two get the artifact to safety." Ethan hesitated, torn between his desire to protect his friend and his duty to the galaxy. "Vara, no," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "We can't leave you behind." Vara smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You have to, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "The artifact is more important than any one of us. You know that." Ethan felt tears stinging his eyes, but he knew that Vara was right. With a heavy heart, he nodded, clasping Vara's hand in a final, desperate gesture of friendship. "Thank you, Vara," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "For everything." Vara nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Now go," she said, her voice urgent, "before it's too late." As Ethan and Mara raced away, the sounds of battle echoing behind them, Ethan felt a sense of grief and loss washing over him. He knew that Vara was sacrificing herself for the greater good, but that knowledge did little to ease the pain in his heart. "We have to keep going," Mara urged, her voice strained with exhaustion. "We're almost to the escape pods." Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. They rounded a final corner, the escape pods coming into view, only to find their path blocked by a group of rogue Xar'Kog soldiers, their weapons trained on Ethan and Mara. "Hand over the artifact," one of the soldiers commanded, his voice cold and menacing, "and maybe we'll let you live." Ethan felt a surge of anger and defiance rising within him. "Never," he spat, his hand tightening around the artifact. "I'll die before I let you have it." The soldier laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "That can be arranged," he sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a blinding light erupted from the artifact, engulfing Ethan and Mara in a shimmering field of energy. The soldiers stumbled back, shielding their eyes against the glare, as Ethan felt a rush of power surging through his body. And then, in a flash of insight, he understood. The artifact had chosen him, had granted him the power to shape the very fabric of reality itself. With a cry of exultation, Ethan raised the artifact high, channeling its energy into a blinding burst of light that swept the soldiers away like leaves before a hurricane. "Ethan!" Mara cried, her voice filled with awe and wonder. "How did you—" But Ethan barely heard her, his mind consumed by the visions that danced before his eyes. He saw the future stretching out before him, a tapestry of infinite possibilities waiting to be shaped by his hand. And he knew, with a certainty that went beyond mere knowledge, that he had the power to change the galaxy, to bring about a new era of peace and prosperity for all. But first, he had to stop the rogue faction, had to prevent them from plunging the galaxy into darkness and despair. With a final, determined nod, Ethan turned to Mara, his eyes blazing with a fierce, unyielding resolve. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice ringing with the power of the Protheans, once and for all. Chapter 6. The Legacy. The final battle raged across the stars as the forces of the Galactic Alliance clashed with the rogue Xar'Kog faction in a desperate struggle for the fate of the galaxy. At the heart of the conflict, Ethan Riker stood tall, the Prothean artifact pulsing with energy in his hands. "It's over," Ethan declared, his voice echoing across the void of space. "Surrender now, and we can end this without further bloodshed." The leader of the rogue faction, his face twisted with hatred and madness, let out a howl of rage. "Never!" he screamed, his voice filled with a desperate, unhinged fury. "The power of the Protheans will be mine, and I will rule the galaxy as a god." With a final defiant roar, the leader charged at Ethan, his weapons blazing with a searing, deadly light. But Ethan was ready, the artifact surging with power as he met the leader's attack head-on. The two forces collided in a blinding flash of energy, the shockwaves rippling out across the battlefield. Ethan felt the artifact's power coursing through his body, strengthening his resolve and sharpening his focus. With a final, desperate push, Ethan unleashed the full might of the Prothean technology, a wave of pure, unrelenting force that swept the leader and his forces away like dust before a storm. As the battle finally ended, Ethan stood amidst the wreckage of the rogue faction's fleet, the artifact still glowing softly in his hands. He felt a sense of exhaustion and relief washing over him, the weight of the galaxy lifting from his shoulders. "It's over," Mara said softly, coming to stand beside him. "We did it."
Ethan nodded, a small, tired smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We did," he agreed, his voice filled with a quiet sense of pride and accomplishment.
But even as he savored the moment of victory, Ethan knew that there was still work to be done. The galaxy had been saved, but it would take time and effort to heal the wounds of the conflict, to forge a new era of peace and cooperation. And he knew, too, that the Prothean legacy would continue to shape the course of galactic history, its secrets and wonders waiting to be uncovered by future generations. As Ethan looked out across the stars, he felt a sense of hope and determination rising within him. He had started this journey as a scientist, a researcher driven by curiosity and the thirst for knowledge. But he had become something more, a leader and a hero, a champion of the galaxy and its people. And he knew that he would spend the rest of his life working to fulfill that role, to honor the sacrifices of those who had come before him, and to build a better future for all. With a final, grateful glance at the Prothean artifact, Ethan turned to Mara and the rest of his team, a newfound sense of purpose and resolve shining in his eyes. "Let's get to work," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, unshakable conviction. "We have a galaxy to rebuild and a legacy to uphold." And with that, Ethan Riker stepped forward into the future, ready to embrace his destiny and lead the galaxy into a new age of wonder and discovery.